In this video, we are talking about the setup, gameplay, and design breakdown of the board game Fire Tower. A 2 to 4 player forest fire themed game that results in a very engaging gameplay that is easy to grasp, resulting in a very intuitive game that is also aesthetically pleasing. Hello everybody, my name is Simon, and on this channel I give you a wider and deeper understanding of the world of design. If you like this video, make sure to click that like button and make sure to subscribe to the channel to not miss any of my upcoming videos. A little backstory on this game. I had seen Fire Tower online and I have heard peripherally good things about it, but the box itself never caught my attention enough for me to buy that game over other games. A few weeks ago, I went to Origin's Game Fair in Cincinnati, Ohio, where, as I was buzzing across all the aisles seeing what to play and try, I saw the Fire Tower booth there, with a few tables to demo the game. Their setup was, to be honest, what caught my eye, as they had these fire gems all over the place, some on a cauldron lighted from below, which made it look very cool as the players were grabbing them to put them on the boards. As I was playing mid-game, I knew I wanted to make a design video breakdown about this game. I met and talked a bit with the designers of the game, Gwen Ruel and Sam Bryant from Runaway Parade Games, and they were kind enough to give me a copy of the game, as well as the expansion set, to make a video about them. This one will be doing a separate video on it, so I'll see you later. We'll focus on this one for the time being. With that said, let's get started. In the box, you will find one quad-fold game board, 3 Tower Ablaze Tower conceal cards, a double-sided weather vane, an octahedron or 8-sided die, a flame meeple, 135 fire gems, 24 firebreak tokens, a deck of 60 cards, and lastly your game rules and manual and a promo sheet with other games they have made so far. Once you have the board on the table, identify the unused towers and conceal them. 4 fire gems are placed on the fire graphic in the middle of the board, which is called the Eternal Flame. Choose which side of the weather vane will be used and set it on the table. Throw the wind die to determine the starting direction of the wind and place the flame meeple accordingly on the weather vane. Place a bucket/reckless abandon card in front of each player. Take the Shadow of the Wood and Champion of the Wood cards, as well as the 2 event cards, and set them apart. Shuffle the deck of action cards and deal 5 cards to each player. Then shuffle in the event cards. Place the firebreak tokens next to the fire gems, and we're all set up to start this game. The objective of the game is to be the last tower standing. You lose when the fire reaches the top of your tower, represented by the square in the board. Players will use the forest fire and manipulate the wind to burn other players' towers while putting out fires and building barricades to protect their own tower. The turn structure is very simple, consisting of 2 steps which need to be completed in this order. First, spread fire in the direction of the wind, and second, take action from your tower. In step 1, the active player has to take note of the direction of the wind by looking at the current state of the weather vane and take 1 fire gem and place that fire gem orthogonally adjacent to an existing fire on the board. For example, let's say it's the very beginning of our game and the wind direction has been set to west. The first player has to look at the Eternal Flame and place the fire gem west of the existing fires. Let's say the game has advanced a few rounds, and the board is a bit more complex. The wind direction is still west, and these are all the possible locations where the active player can now place their fire gem. In step 2, players have 2 options. They can either play 1 card from their hand, discard it, and draw a new card from the deck, or they can discard as many cards as they want from their hand and redraw that many cards. Of course, foregoing any other actions for their turn. And that is it. A very simple turn structure. With the setup and the basic turn structure explained, let's get into the gameplay, and hopefully I do a decent enough job of communicating how fun and dynamic this game is. The player starts their turn with step 1, taking the fire gem, checking the wind direction, and strategically placing the fire gem so it helps them get a bit closer to burning their opponent's tower. Then comes step 2, and here is where it gets interesting. The player checks their hand, in which they will see any number of 4 card types in their hand: the wind card, the fire card, the water card, and the fire break card. Let's quickly explain what each one of these types do. The fire cards are your primary way to spread fire across the forest by letting you place fire gems in different patterns on the board. When placing fire gems from a fire card, you need to make sure that at least one of the new fire gems are orthogonally adjacent to an existing fire gem on the board, but fire cards do not need to follow the wind direction rule. There are 4 types of fire cards: the burning snag, which lets you place 4 fire gems in the pattern of a square; the flare up lets you place a straight line of 3 fire gems; the explosion lets you choose a fire gem on the board, replace it with a fire break token, and put a fire gem in all vacant spaces around it; and the ember, which lets you move an existing fire gem to a new location. The water cards are your primary way of putting existing fires out. There are 3 types of water cards: the fire engine, which lets you remove up to 4 fire gems in the pattern of a square; the airdrop cards let you remove a line of 3 adjacent fire gems; and the smoke jumper lets you choose an existing fire gem on the board and remove all surrounding fire gems around it while leaving the center fire gem untouched. The one thing to note about the water card is that they cannot remove fire gems inside your tower area. The fire break cards place fire break tokens on the board. A fire break token blocks fire gems from being placed on a tile or going through that tile. Fire break tokens cannot be placed on the eternal flame, can only be placed on vacant spaces, and cannot be placed orthogonally adjacent to each other unless stated differently. There are 3 types of fire break cards. The dozer line cards lets you place 2 adjacent fire break tokens on the board. The scratch line lets you place 2 fire break tokens with a space between them. The D/reforest card lets you place or remove 1 fire break token from the board. The wind cards are the primary way to change the direction of the wind in this game. There is really one type of wind card with 4 variations of north, east, south, and west. Each wind card offers a player one of 3 options when played. Players can change the wind direction and the direction stated in the card. They can roll a die to choose a random new direction for the wind, or the player can place 1 fire gem in the cardinal direction stated in the card without changing the overall wind direction of the game. As you can see, this card is manipulating the biggest factor in the game, the wind direction, and is the card that feels the most impactful to everybody when played. Often, if you have the right cardinal direction in your hand, you can push future fire expansions away from you and towards your opponents, changing the pace of the game for you from being defensive to being aggressive. Or, if you have the wrong cardinal direction, you can still take a gamble and throw that die to change the wind direction, but with no real control aside from not being the current one. Or you can use the card in a more surgical manner and just place 1 fire gem in a very specific direction without changing anything else. So, let's get back to the player's hand. The player can now, in their second step of their turn, choose 1 card from their hand and play it. After they have played it and put it in the discard pile, they draw a new card from the deck and the turn ends automatically. Except if they draw an event card, which needs to be played immediately. Event cards are meant to shake things up in the game, so they are the impactful and wild variables in the game. There are 2 event cards in the game, and they are shuffled in after players have been dealt their starting hand for the game. Mutual Aid lets players that drew the card choose 1 of 3 possible actions for every single player in the game to take. Each player can play a fire gem, each player can remove a fire gem, or each player can discard and redraw 3 cards. Firestorm makes the player who draws it throw the wind die to determine a wind direction in which a fire gem is going to be placed in every single spot to all adjacent fire gems on the board. The die is rolled once again to establish a new wind direction while giving the chance to all players to discard as many cards as they want to redraw their hand size. As you can see, Firestorm is a card that when it appears, it pushes the game forward in a massive way. This is a basic loop players are running through as they are progressing through this game. That first step of putting that one fire gem every turn helps to keep the game moving forward, and it serves as a basic tool in the arsenal of the players to build a strategy from. When the win is in your strategic favor, it feels really good to be able to keep extending that fire towards your opponents, even if it is one fire gem at a time. But when the wind is in the direction of your tower, you're trying to place it where at least would affect you, with a bit of foresight for when the wind does favor you again. So there is a very nice dynamic of change overlaid with the tension of not knowing when someone is changing the wind direction and changing the reach and direction of the forest fire, which makes you very attentive and therefore engaged during your opponent's turns, as their actions directly and immediately affect your strategy. I also noticed that you can quickly determine what available tools and components you have to build your strategy from in a very easy and intuitive manner because of the card colors. If you see that your hand is all red, you know that you have the tools to be very aggressive and to try to burn at your opponent's tower. If you find yourself with mostly blue and purple cards, you know you have defensive tools. If you have a mix of red and gray cards, you can be more strategic than aggressive. Or any mix of colors, you end up in a spectrum of mid-range strategies. This of course changes from set of turns to set of turns, but it's good user interface to be able to determine your strategic direction from just being able to quickly glance at your hand's overall color palette. The colors in your hand reflect the strategy at hand, and if you want to craft a specific strategy, you have the option of discarding cards to sculpt your hand for the next turn, but it is a risky move as the wind might not be in your favor anymore by next turn. As the game progresses and the wind batters the forest fire in every direction, with players taking advantage to further spread the fire to their advantage or defend against it, you start seeing the fire gems spreading all around, creating a very aesthetically pleasing visual frame of the game. And as those fire gems start encroaching into the very special and dangerous area that is the tower zone, your fire break and water cards become useless. And the wind direction becomes ever more important, as one gem, a turn in the right direction, can take a player out, since the tower zone is formed of just a 3x3 tile area. That is where the bucket cards come in handy. This card is dealt to every player at the start of the game and sits in the table exposed and can be used as an extra action in the player's turn once in the game. The bucket card can remove up to 3 adjacent fire gems where at least one of those gems is in the tower zone. This is your only way of putting fire out that's inside your tower zone, so players need to be careful when they use this, making sure they are not wasting it too soon or being too conservative and caving into their opponent's strategy. Once a player uses the bucket card, it automatically flips to reveal its other side, the Reckless Abandon. Reckless Abandon can be used as the action for the turn, and it permits the players to discard a set of 3 water cards or 3 fire break cards to place 2 fire gems on the board while drawing back to the player's hand size. This is one of the cards that really shows how well balanced and dynamic this game is. From the bucket, a very defensive card, you get access to the Reckless Abandon, where it is letting you exchange all of your defensive measures to be able to develop an aggressive strategy. And being tied to the bucket means that players cannot have access to it until the game board is sufficiently developed where fire has reached someone's tower zone, which gives that player the opportunity to push their winning strategy by being extra aggressive, or it lets the player take a kamikaze stand and go in all out in a frenzy to see if they can come back and win or push players back. This also gives the player that is in the most danger access to this ability first, which is a good countermeasure to maintaining a good balance between players and avoiding one player being able to completely overpower the other player and make the game shorter. When the first tower is completely burned down by putting a fire in the last tile, if you are playing a 2-player game, then congratulations! The winner is declared. But if you are playing a 3 to 4 player game, the designers did something very cool, a concept I myself have explored in my own prototypes. The player that loses the game is not taken out of the game, but rather they are given a different role to play in the game, and are still given a chance to win the game, but in a much harder way, of course. In this game, when you lose, you become the Shadow of the Wood. You become a player with a set of different abilities and rules just for you, and your goal changes from being the last tower to not burn, to having to burn all the towers. As a shadow, your abilities change to be very flavorful of a vengeful forest spirit. You have no hand and you have no tower to protect. At the start of your turn, you throw the wind die, and depending on each of the 4 directions, you take a specific action. If you roll north, you can place 1 fire gem without caring for the wind direction. East makes you roll the wind die 3 times and place a fire gem each time in that direction. South lets you draw 2 cards and play 1 and discard them both at the end of the turn. West lets you remove a fire break or change the wind direction to your choice. As mentioned, I think this is both flavorful but also mechanically engaging, as a player that loses doesn't stop being part of the game, they just take on a different role. And lastly, whoever wins the game is now in possession of the Champion of the Wood card. This card helps to extend the results of the game just played into a future game by letting the winner hold on to the card and bring it into the next game, in which the card grants a special ability. The player with the champion card at the start of the game can place 2 fire break tokens on the board, and once per game before the start of their turn, they can discard their entire hand and redraw it. This seems like a nice way of creating a meta state in a group of friends where there are bragging rights and effects coming into play from the previous game. In the game design world, there are 2 basic categories in which games can be sorted out that characterize their creation approach: top-down and bottom-up. A bottom-up approach is when a game is designed with its mechanical structure and gameplay dynamics at the forefront of the design, while lore and narrative elements come afterwards. A top-down design is when a specific theme is taken and game mechanics and gameplay are crafted and generated to fit the feel of that particular theme. The theme is the guiding principle for the design decisions from a mechanical and gameplay standpoint. Fire Tower is clearly a top-down design. I can see every mechanical theme and gameplay dynamic has been selected and fine-tuned to perfectly fit into this theme of forest fires and watchtowers. From putting fires out with buckets, to deforesting to avoid the spread of future fires, to having the wind become a firestorm and create fiery chaos all around. An advantage that top-down design tend to have over bottom-up design is that they tend to be very intuitive for players because they come from an already known or developed theme and logic set. For example, having to watch the direction of the wind to see where the fire is going to grow is very intuitive, as well as your water cards being able to remove fire. Being intuitive helps the players be able to grasp the rules and notions of the game faster, which lowers the barrier of entry since it uses intuition as a tool to introduce players to the game's mechanics, which in turn makes the players grok the game faster and get into enjoying it quicker, instead of spending their time trying to understand it to be able to play it. Fire Tower is not just a very thematically consistent, intuitive board game design to grasp, with a resulting appealing board aesthetic that feels almost like a visual reward for playing the game. Kind of like photosynthesis. It's also a very well-defined play space with a clear set of rules and mechanics, generating very interesting and dynamic gameplay that keeps you engaged and coming back to play it. Sort of like Catan. The only feedback that I have for the game is that the Tower Ablaze/Conceal cards are a bit flimsy, and while playing, one tends to move them out of their place a lot, so maybe having some sort of locking mechanism would be preferable to not break my immersion and have to stop playing the game to fix the board instead of me seeing the board to play the game. The other item is not really a critique, but rather a request. Give me a 3-dimensional representation of that eternal flame. I think that would highly complement the visual resulting end state of the game, that visual aesthetical reward I keep mentioning. Aside from that, Fire Tower is definitely on my top 3 board games to play right now, and I am looking forward to what Gwen and Sam will be creating in the future. And that is it for this video. Remember, in this video I just talked about the base game, but Fire Tower also has an expansion set, which I will be doing a separate video on, which I will be discussing what it is in it, but also how it modifies the base game and how it expands on the original design. Make sure to be on the lookout for that video. If you want to check out the game for yourself, I have the links to it in the description below. alongside a few videos I think might be of interest to you. If you like the video, make sure to click that like button, as it really helps with the algorithm, and make sure you are subscribed to my channel to not miss any of my future videos. Leave a comment below with a suggestion for a future video or any comments at all, and let me know what you think about the board game design of Fire Tower. With that said, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.